Okay, class. So this is the second part of the unit that's going to cover space, time, and motion, and we're going to cover time and motion, the elements time and motion together. This will be a little bit shorter of a lecture with a lot of examples to consider. So time and motion are really, I think, something that we understand, but they're really hard to kind of define. So time is suggesting like events occurring in succession in real life experiences. And so it's going to be kind of complicated to think about how we can capture this in two-dimensional art, since it is a flat a flat spatial piece of art. But we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can create a sense of time in our work. So the first way is through stop time, and that's like capturing like a frozen moment in time. And we can do this from sketching something, from photographing it, from painting, maybe from an actual moment in time. I have a little YouTube video here you can watch about performance artists that all froze in time in Grand Central Station in New York once for this big um, uh, what's it called? I can't think of what they're called. Flash mob, but they were performance artists that all froze in time, and everybody was freaking out because they didn't know what was going on. So there's a lot of ways we can stop time in work, and so I have some examples to show you of how we can show that in our work. So the first one is through kind of like how we tell stories, like different parts of stories together, showing a succession. And this is not a children's book. This is actually from the Book of the Dead from ancient Egypt. And often people were buried with these scrolls showing how to pass the different tests through the afterlife. And if you look at this image, you can see the same person wearing all white with black hair repeated in the left side, the sort of middle to right side, and then in the upper register and the top part, the upper left part of the composition. And so, if you could read hieroglyphics, you would be able to translate this story. But basically, it shows these series of tests that the person would have to face. One with their heart being weighed against an ostrich feather. And if the heart was heavy, that meant they would have lived a bad life and they wouldn't move on to the next phase, which would be being questioned by Osiris, who was one of the major Egyptian gods. And if they passed that test, then they would move on to the afterlife, where they were greeted by the graces that had gone before them. And so these stop moments in this story kind of help tell the story or create the sense of time or passage of succession of moments throughout time, if that makes sense. So we use this a lot in children books, and then also in a lot of religious texts when back before most people knew how to read, they would use images to kind of tell those stories. Now, with the invention of technology, we can also always find new ways to capture time or moments of time. And in the 1930s, MIT scientist named Harold Egerton, he created a camera that could capture 1/100,000th of a second. And some people call this science, but I think at some moments science and art kind of collide, and that's what happened here. So this is something our naked eye cannot see. So we have technology allowing us to see things we've never seen before. And you can imagine how fascinating this would be to artists, but also how this would help explain things that happen really quickly to scientists to understand what's happening with the world around us. So this image here is a ball falling into a bowl of milk. And what we were able to see for the first time was a perfect crowning effect. And again, this happens so quickly. With our eyes, we had never been able to see this before. The same thing with this bullet passing through an apple. We had never been able to see this backfire and what all happens. And now there's a whole field of studies called ballistics that studies like the effects of bullets, and now they're able to use the science to help prove what happened in different crime scenes and things like that. Here's a bullet passing through a suspended card from a piece of tape. And here's a jet breaking the sound barrier, which normally we can't see anything, but cameras can capture this cloud-like effect that happens that's pretty amazing. So that's what we call stop moments of time in artwork. And manipulated time is being able to manipulate time in works of art. And this more applies to movies and video, which we won't be doing in this class. And I have some video links here, but they're pretty old now, because I first created this lecture, I think, back in 2010. And so technology has just advanced so much. But if you follow the YouTube channel, the Slow-Mo guys, it's basically that camera that they use that now we have on our cell phones. Most people have the option to do time lapse and things like that on their phones now. And so we've really learned just in the last 10, 20 years how to manipulate time with video. We can fast forward, rewind, speed up, slow down, do strobe light effects, all sorts of different things, tell multiple stories at the same time. So we can even pause TV now with our different cable and internet providers, where you can pause live TV and rewind and go back. So we've really learned how to really manipulate time quite a bit. And you can imagine how confusing that would be if we were to get people from 50 years ago and have them see all the movies and television that we have today, and even YouTube videos and things, the amazing things people are able to do. It's pretty impressive. So time and motion are closely related, as when things are happening in succession, they tend to be moving. So actual motion is where things change their position over time. Kinetic art, that means art that moves, such as a mobile, like we talked about with Alexander Calder. And then there were movements throughout art history that actually captured their job, their purpose was to capture a sense of movement or motion in their artwork. And most of that was inspired by blurred photography that they were seeing in the early 1900s, late 1800s, of photographers trying to capture motion. So it's kind of funny how nowadays, whenever we see a blurred photo, we would think of that as a mistake or as a bad image, but back then they had never seen that before. So that actually inspired them to create paintings that look like blurred photographs, and that's what we call futurism, or I can't say it, Dianism. And so we have some examples of that where it just captures kind of the motion in the painting or drawing. And then, of course, with the kinetic motion or kinetic sculptures or art, we have like Alexander Calder's mobiles that actually moved. And then we can also record actual motion now through video and film and with photography. Now, we talked about implied motion a little bit in the chapter over space. And so, like I said, it's kind of hard to talk about these things separate, and that's why they've been combined together. So we talked about Bernini in the last chapter and how it almost seemed like he was able to pause marble. We can also show that by repeating imagery over and over, the same image, that maybe that implies a sense of motion or time, like we see with this character in this image repeating over and over in different positions. We can see it in this series of photographs where the artist is pronouncing different syllables of words, and then as you look at them together, you can almost translate what she's trying to say, like read her lips. And then we can also create an illusion of motion in artwork, and here are some examples of that. So here we have this artist that has a very busy painting, but then they took some of the objects in the painting and made sculptures that they put in front of the piece, which maybe makes it look even more like these things are moving around and falling out of the canvas. So again, if you want to create an illusion of motion, you can have repetition, multiple canvases or pieces that go together, including 3D objects with 2D objects, and how you position the objects together. Now, with photography, it really helped us start to create more of a communication of time and motion. And there were several phases for that. And I have some examples to show you. So early on, Thomas Eakins was someone that was trying to figure out how to re-expose the same piece of film to capture something moving. And the upper image is an example of a successful capture of re-exposing the same piece of film and capturing someone uh, pole vaulting. And it may look like a blurred image to us, but that was pretty exciting for that time period. And then those types of images that started circulating is what inspired artists to start painting and drawing like that and then capture motion in their work. So that lower image is a drawing or painting by Duchamp, where he was trying to capture someone moving down the stairs or walking down the stairs. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of make out like their torso and their hips as they move downwards, walking down the stairs. So it's kind of funny that people were trying to paint like blurred photos. Here's another example of that, and it's funny how this was also called futurism or Dianism as well, like it because it kind of seems like kind of silly to all the technology that we have today. Now they also realized that by blurring things, that makes it appear to be moving. And so here's some examples of that throughout art history. The woman walking down the stairs, that's an actual oil painting, and he would paint it so realistically and then blur it so that it looked like it was a blurred photo. We also talked about optical illusions early on in the semester when we discussed line and op art by artists like Bridget Riley. And so that's another way we can create motion or a sense of time in artwork. So here's some more examples. Like I said, repeating figures. We see that in a lot of religious and ancient depictions of time periods and where we see storytelling taking place. There's also a kind of performance art or body art piece here where a man laid with a book on his stomach in the sun, and then when he removed the book after he got a tan, it kind of captures the passage of time by showing the tan lines. Now, the motion picture was invented kind of by chance. I imagine we would have gotten there some way eventually after the invention of photography. But Edward Muybridge is given kind of the credit for the early stages of it. He was at a horse race one day and began arguing with a friend whether all four of the horse's legs come off the ground at once when it's running. And so he set up to prove the bet. He set up cameras all around a horse track and then had them all fire while a horse was running. And when they looked at all of these negatives together, they could see, sure enough, all four of the horse's legs do come off the ground, as you can see with the second frame. But then they also realized that by seeing all these images together, you can see a suggestion of motion or movement. And that's what led to the invention of the flip book and then eventually the motion picture. And so with the invention of the motion picture, now we have all sorts of things that we can do, special effects that I don't have to tell you guys about because you've grown up with all of these things from, strobe lights, creating, really high impact motion and action scenes, to slow motion, to we have video and animation now, and we have better resolution and all of these other types of editing techniques and different ways we can capture storytelling and time and motion in our work. So although this is not a film class and you're going to be creating a two-dimensional piece of art, these are still things that you might consider. There may be a way you can suggest or imply these things in your work. And I will be showing you several examples of students' projects, but you're all going to be able to kind of do your own thing. There's only going to be a few requirements that you have to meet for this project. So you may just kind of start brainstorming as you look at the different things and you work on your sketchbook exercises so you can come up with maybe something more original for your space, time, and motion project as well. So next you'll want to move on to review the vocabulary and then begin on the sketchbook exercises and the project.